Hey guys, tonight we time travel into a world where the air itself might be out to get you. The candles are flickering. The shutters creak as wind snakes through the cracks. You're not in your room anymore. You're standing on a muddy track in the Carpathians Mid-1700s. Thunder growls on the ridge. A hunched villager tugs your coat, muttering that something wrong has been buried too shallow, too recently. You don't speak the language, but the look in his eyes, pure dread, needs no translation. A gust whips past. You swear it moans. You're here to learn why 18th century doctors, educated and robe-wrapped as they were, honestly believed the wind was waking the dead. Yes, literal wind. Breezes. Gusts. Air currents, those invisible nuisances that flip your umbrella inside out today, were once thought to raise vampires from grave. You probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where you're all listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through muck toward a hamlet, so tiny it doesn't appear on any map, because maps are still sketched by monks or noblemen with spotty geography skills. There's no glow but the lantern swinging in the doctor's hand ahead. He walks fast. You try to match his stride, but your boots sink with every step. When you finally arrive at the village's edge, you feel it, that tight sensation in your chest. Part fear, part thin air. The wind here doesn't whistle, it growls. Inside a narrow cottage, candlelight reveals furrowed brows. The town's healer, a Feldsher, they call him, hunches beside a child's bed. The girl wheezes, cheeks flushed, limbs twitching. Her mother keeps crossing herself. The Feldsher mutters something about ill vapors. You don't need the translation. It's the wind again. And you think, really? Still with the wind? But this was the 1700s. The Age of Enlightenment. Sure, but only for about 12 people with powdered wigs and university access. For everyone else, wind remained a cosmic scapegoat. It didn't just mess up your hair, it carried death. Miasma was the medical buzzword. Bad air, thick with rot and wickedness. And it was believed to enter your body the moment you yawned at the wrong breeze. The Feldsher opens a leather pouch filled with herbs, powders, and, oh look, beetle wings. He burns them in a saucer, the smoke hissing upward like a ghost you accidentally insulted. The smell is horrible. The child wails. Outside, the wind shrieks in kind. Here's the thing. This fear of wind wasn't totally irrational. Back then, bad weather did seem to trigger illnesses. A cold snap might lead to pneumonia. A humid stretch could bring fevers. Correlation became cause. Wind, the invisible villain, made for a perfect suspect, especially when sickness struck with no visible wound. And in vampire country, corpses that didn't behave properly blame the wind. Bodies exhumed weeks after burial sometimes looked too fresh, rosy, bloated, even bloody around the mouth. Why? Well, decomposition gases cause swelling. Blood can seep and pool. But to 18th century eyes, it looked like these people had fed recently. At a night breeze howling past the graveyard, and boom, your cousin's not dead. He's undead. Historians still argue whether such vampiric beliefs were more folklore than medicine. But in small towns, there was no clear line. The Feldsher acted as both doctor and demonologist. If your fever didn't break, someone might blame the wrong burial ritual, or a gust of wind through a half-closed church window, or that hunchback guy who always looks suspicious during full moons. You feel a tickle on your neck. Just wind. You turn. Nothing's there. Still, you wrap your scarf tighter. By morning, the child's fever breaks. Everyone credits the herb smoke and the fact that the wind finally stopped. You, meanwhile, credit sheer luck and maybe some overcooked beetle wing aromatherapy. The Feldsher takes you out back to a wooden shed, unlocks a trunk, and shows you something strange. A set of carved masks. One has exaggerated cheeks and a long, pointy nose with holes bored through it. For plague wind, he says, you realize it's a primitive version of a doctor's mask, designed not for disguise, but filtration of the wicked air. You step outside and the air smells cleaner. But you start to see it differently. Wind isn't just weather anymore. It's narrative. It's the scapegoat for everything unexplainable. And in a world where germ theory hasn't even stretched its legs, you kind of get it. Still, a whisper inside you says, maybe you should keep your window closed tonight. The next night, you're dragged out of half sleep by an insistent tapping at your shutters. The wind, again. You lie there in the straw-stuffed bed of the inn, heart racing, and try to convince yourself it's just a tree branch. But you don't remember any tree outside your window. When you wake, bleary-eyed and tangled in your coat, the felcher is already waiting for you with a walking stick and a bundle of notes. You've been upgraded from accidental visitor to medical apprentice. Congratulations. Payment? Well, the honor of not being buried in cursed soil is incentive enough. Your lesson today begins in the draftiest building imaginable, the local chapel, perched like a wooden birdcage on the edge of a cliff. Wind slices through the slats. You can barely hear yourself think over the howling. The felcher calls this the perfect classroom. Of course he does. He opens a tattered notebook with spidery handwriting. This wind, it is not just a chill, he explains. It is an agent. You almost laugh, but he's dead serious. To him, and to countless 18th century healers, the wind is more than weather. It's personality, intention. There's a term you'll hear a lot now. Miasma, bad air, unhealthy breezes. The stuff of every physician's nightmares before germ theory strolled into the picture holding a microscope and a smirk. Wind was believed to carry disease particles, the kind you couldn't see, smell, or avoid unless you wore bird masks or burned enough herbs to choke a horse. They thought wind had moods, too. A dry, warm wind from the east might bring madness. A cold wind from the north, melancholy. The wrong breeze in your lungs, and boom, headache, plague, sudden desire to sleep forever in a pine box. It sounds absurd, but then again, you've had days when the weather messes with your mood, haven't you? Now imagine living in a world without HVAC, weather apps, or even glass windows. A sudden wind change wasn't just annoying, it was terrifying. A storm could bring crop failure. A hot breeze might spark fever. One particularly dramatic physician even wrote, "Where the air stirs, so stirs death's breath." Quirky fact of the day, some healers used to wave fabric flags over the heads of patients to determine the direction of the ill wind. Like a slow, miserable game of capture the flag, except you're playing against the invisible hand of doom. The felcher hands you a small vial. This, he says, contains garlic steeped in spirits. You raise an eyebrow. He nods. To drink before wind touches your face. You politely pocket it, filing it under things I will absolutely not swallow unless coerced by a vampire. You move from chapel to graveyard. Here, stones lean like gossiping old men, and the wind, of course, is strongest. You ask why the sick are never buried on the hill. The felcher frowns. Because wind from graves spreads sickness. There is, again, that uncanny link between air and afterlife. Historians still argue whether physicians truly believed in vampires or if the vampire label was just a convenient way to explain the unexplained. But what's clear is that the wind was always complicit. A body exhumed in good weather? Probably fine. A body dug up during a howling gust? Suspicious, especially if the deceased had rosy cheeks and a bloated belly. Common signs of decomposition, but misunderstood as signs of feeding. And in this village, as in so many others, whenever someone died oddly or returned from the dead, according to rumor, the first thing blamed wasn't black magic. It was the breeze. Specifically, the corpse wind, believed to rise from open graves and enter through open mouths, infecting the living with death's echo. You glance around. A nearby grave has fresh flowers. Someone still visits. The wind picks up again, cold and sudden. It seems to linger at your collar, like fingers testing your pulse. You wonder, briefly, if you've inhaled something you shouldn't have. Back inside, you warm your hands over a brazier. The felcher draws a chart. Wind directions, seasonal fevers, symptoms tracked over years. It's oddly scientific. until he marks a symbol next to the autumn winds, a stylized fawn. Autumn, he says, is when they wake. Meaning vampires, of course. But not the cape-wearing, brooding aristocrats you know from movies. These are bloated peasants with scratch marks on their coffins and straw stuffed in their mouths to keep them from chewing themselves out. You're beginning to see how these dots connected. If the wind made people sick and corpses that looked alive again were found during windy nights, it was easy, maybe even logical, to draw a straight line. Wind awakens the dead. Vampires ride the breeze. It wasn't superstition, it was a theory. A really, really creepy one. One last tidbit before bed. Some midwives believe that infants exposed to strong wind before their naming ceremony could be wind-marked, cursed with sickly dispositions, prone to sleepwalking, or worse, waking up years later in graves. Sleep tight. You wake to the sound of quills scratching on parchment. The Felcher has transformed the inn's common room into a lecture hall of sorts. Except instead of students, it's just you, a goat chewing on the leg of a stool, and a stack of hand-copied treatises that smell like mildew and regret. He gestures for you to sit. Time to study the playbook, he says. That playbook? 18th-century medical texts. Many of them imported from Vienna, Krakow, or places you can't pronounce without rolling at least 3 syllables off your tongue. They all fixate on one villain, the wind. You open a treatise titled De Air et Epidemia. The Latin translates to On Air and Epidemics, but it might as well be called 101 Reasons the Wind Hates You Personally. Inside, every illness, coughs, fevers, wasting diseases, is linked to a change in air pressure or wind direction. If you didn't sneeze in a still room, you must have angered the breeze. What's surprising is how methodical these authors are. Wind is charted by quality. Dry or moist, hot or cold, fast or sluggish. Each combination corresponds to specific diseases. A hot, moist wind? Expect putrefaction. Cold, dry? Likely to cause lethargy and paralysis. It's like Pokemon cards, but instead of powers, each has a corresponding way to ruin your day. The fringe factor? One text you find refers to nocturnal ether disturbances as a trigger for restless death. That's a euphemism for vampire activity if ever you've seen one. The air, it claims, grows heavy with mischief when the moon wanes, allowing the dead that were not quite dead to stir. You read that line twice. Yep, still creepy. The Felcher pours you something brown and herbal that tastes like regret steeped in bark. To clear the humors, he says. You pretend to sip. He flips to another page, showing you diagrams of the human body drawn like primitive weather maps. Arrows through the lungs, pressure symbols around the gut, gusty swirls labeled melancholia. This is where you learn how central wind was to the four humors theory, the dominant medical worldview at the time. Wind wasn't just blowing around outside. It was believed to enter the body, disrupting the balance of blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. These humors governed your health, your mood, even your dreams. If the wind was bad, it could make your bile rise. Literally, this isn't metaphor. Doctors took it seriously. They diagnose wind congestion, which sounds like something your mom might say after too much broccoli, but in this case meant dangerous buildups of air inside the body. Some treated it with cupping. Others prescribed leeches. A few, hilariously, recommended controlled burping. The 18th century was full of charm. Historians still argue whether this obsession with wind was pure science, fear-mongering, or a clever way to deflect blame when your patient didn't recover. After all, you can't sue the breeze. The field notes also include case studies from other towns. One recounts a woman who fell ill every time the east wind blew. The villagers whispered she was touched by the grave breath, not a compliment. Another tells a young man whose nose bled uncontrollably during gales and who later died with, gasp, teeth marks on his neck. Probably a coincidence. Probably. But here's the wildest theory you read. Some doctors believe the lungs were not just air filters, but wind engines. That is, they generated internal breezes. These mini gusts could either circulate healthy vapors or, if corrupted, stir death inside your very ribs. Your own breath might betray you. The Felcher agrees with this one. He says, Breath is life. But bad breath is more than just rude. You stare at him. Is that a joke? He doesn't blink. Probably not. Quirky detail. In some regions, sick patients were placed in drafty halls on purpose. The idea was that the bad air inside them would be coaxed out by stronger air from the outside, like opening windows to chase out ghosts, which sometimes backfired because patients also froze to death. Whoops. You get up to stretch. The goat is still chewing the stool. You can't blame him. It's been a long day. By evening, you're copying notes by candlelight. The flickering flame seems to dance every time the wind sighs through the door cracks. You write down something that sticks with you. When the wind enters, beware what it may carry or wake. Later, the Feldsher hands you a final treatise. The pages are brittle, almost translucent. It doesn't have an author. Just the title, Ventus et Sanguis, Wind and Blood. You turn to the first page. The opening line reads, "They do not dig themselves up. It is the wind that lifts them," and you suddenly don't want to go outside ever again. Night has crept in without your permission. The wind has shifted again, sharper this time, as if it carries little blades in its breath. You and the Feldsher are roused by frantic knocking at the door. A man stumbles in, soaked to the knees and pale as flour. He pants a single word, "graveyard." The Feldsher wastes no time. He grabs his pouch, motions for you to follow, and you both sprint into the darkness, boots sloshing through mud and puddles that weren't there an hour ago. Lightning flashes. For a brief moment, you see the graveyard, and more specifically, a group of villagers clustered around a torn-up mound of earth. Someone's been unearthed. You approach cautiously. The body lies exposed, half out of the ground like it was trying to claw its way free. Except it didn't get far. The hands are stiff. The face is, well, not quite what you expect. No rot. No sunken features. The mouth is slightly open. Lips dark and plump. There's blood on the chin. One of the villagers spits. "He's been feeding," she says. You feel your skin go tight. Now let's hit pause. We both know decomposition causes strange things. Bodies swell. Blood seeps. Gases expand and push fluids out. But to these people, standing under a thrashing sky with lanterns swinging and wind howling past their ears, this isn't biology. It's behavior. It's proof that this man, who died 2 weeks ago of a fever, is now wandering at night, snacking on the living. The Feldsher kneels, inspecting the corpse. "Look," he says, pointing. The stomach is distended. The cheeks are full. The wind last night stirred him up. Yes, he means that literally. The theory goes like this. Certain winds, especially those whipping through graveyards, could enter the soil and animate corpses. Not in a Hollywood zombie kind of way. More like a puppet reacting to strings you can't see. The pressure changes, the gases move, and suddenly it seems like someone is breathing again. The villagers bring torches now. Not for light, but for ritual. They want to deal with it. You're not sure what that means until you see the stakes. Actual wooden stakes. Historians still argue whether these exhumations were medical checks, panic responses, or ritualized executions of superstition. But in this moment, with thunder cracking and wind ripping cloaks sideways, nobody is interested in debate. You try to interject. Maybe it's natural decomposition, but you're outvoted by fear. The Feldsher sighs and tells them to wait. He opens his notes and starts his process. This, it turns out, is your first vampire autopsy. It's not glamorous. The Feldsher carefully makes incisions, commenting on each feature. Lungs still bloated, mouth still red. He points out how the body hasn't stiffened the way one might expect. That combined with the blood, plus the windy night, well, you can guess the conclusion. Quirky detail. Some texts recommend sprinkling poppy seeds into the grave to keep a vampire busy. He'll have to count every grain before rising. Others suggest placing a stone under the tongue to trap the soul. But here, they just stake and burn. Simple, efficient, horrifying. You're offered the honor of holding the lantern. You politely decline. The ceremony is swift. The stake is driven. The body twitches and the crowd gasps. You know it's just muscle tension. They think it's proof. As smoke rises from the hastily lit pyre, the wind picks up again. It seems to carry the smell of ash and scorched linen far across the valley. One child points at the fire and whispers, "He'll be in the wind now." And that's the part that rattles you most. Not the corpse, not the blood, but that belief that once someone burns, they don't vanish. They dissolve into the air. And if the wind returns, so might they. The Feldsher walks you back, both of you silent except for the crunch of gravel. At the inn, he hands you a flask. "Drink," he says. You do, even though it tastes like boiled wood. "Wind wakes the bad dead," he mutters. "Always has." You think back to the treatise, they do not dig themselves up. You wonder how many more of these windy graves the hillside, just waiting for a gust strong enough to whisper their names. Before bed, you close the shutters tight. The wind knocks anyway, just once. Then it moves on. You don't sleep much. Not after watching a man's remains go up in flames while villagers whispered about wind spirits and hungry graves. You sit up in the darkness, trying to quiet your thoughts, but the night outside never stops moving. The wind plays with the shutters like a bored cat with a loose latch. Eventually, the gray light of morning seeps in, and the Feldsher is already knocking. "Today," he says, "we ride." You blink at him. "Ride where?" "To where the doctor lives," he replies, as if that explains anything. Turns out the doctor is a visiting physician from a university in Vienna, an Enlightenment man, a real academic. One of the few who walks the tightrope between science and old world horror with equal parts curiosity and disdain. He has a horse, a real one, which makes him practically royalty out here. The ride is miserable. Rain threatens constantly. Wind never stops. The road cuts along steep hillsides, and you've never been more aware of how thin your cloak is. The Feldsher is in good spirits, though. He hums something off-key. When you ask what it is, he says it's a local ballad about a girl who married a man made of mist. Romantic. You arrive at a man's perched precariously above a gorge. The shutters rattle. You swear one groans your name. Inside, the doctor greets you with a nod and something warm in a mug. It's thick, dark, and bitter. Coffee, he calls it. You nearly kiss his feet. The doctor, wiry and wild-haired, leads you into his study. Shelves of books, strange instruments, an anatomical dummy with removable organs, and wind chimes. So many wind chimes, each tuned to a different pitch. He explains that the direction of wind can affect the spread of disease. Not just if someone gets sick, but how. In this village, deaths come mostly from the west. In the next, the north. That's not folklore. That's mapping. He shows you journals where he's documented cases, dozens of them. "See here," he says, pointing to one entry. The patient's fever spiked only after the evening breeze changed direction. Within 2 days, the same happened to his brother. The implication: the wind doesn't just carry illness, it selects its victims. Now the kicker: this doctor has been investigating vampire cases. Not because he believes in them. Oh no, he thinks they're fascinating cultural overreactions. But because something weird keeps happening. In towns where vampires are rumored, people tend to get sicker after a body is exhumed. You raise an eyebrow. You mean because they're disturbing contaminated soil? He shakes his head. I mean the wind changes. Always. The night after an exhumation, the air gets strange. Like it's been watching. You glance at the wind chimes. They're still for now. He shows you a curious device. A sort of wind-measuring contraption made from brass and linen. Anemometer, he says. It counts the movement of air. I've been placing them near graveyards. The results are inconsistent. You translate that to ghosts not yet proven. Historians still argue whether such doctors were genuinely open to supernatural causes or just obsessed with data in all its wild, unpredictable forms. Either way, the border between science and folklore was fuzzier than anyone liked to admit. The doctor then flips open a drawer and pulls out a hand-drawn map. "There," he says, tapping a village about 20 miles north. 5 deaths. Same symptoms. One sighting. Strong western wind every night. What symptoms, you ask? Bloody cough. Nightmares. Feeling of being watched. Classic vampire territory, if you're into that sort of thing. His tone suggests he is. Quirky fact: some Enlightenment physicians actually prescribed wind exposure as a remedy. Yes, you heard right. Patients were taken into high hills or breezy meadows to flush out the humors. One even built a rotating bed so the patient could face the healthiest breeze at all times. Picture it, a human weather vane strapped to a mattress. Medicine is a journey. The doctor gives you some reading material for the ride back. Excerpts from Haller's Physiology, which describes air as a kind of divine messenger entering the body to communicate health or decay. You skim it and realize something chilling. If air can carry life, it can also carry on life. As you leave, the doctor leans in. Watch the wind tonight, he says. It's almost All Saints' Eve. You blink. That's the night when, supposedly, the boundary between worlds thins. Of course it is. The ride home is somehow worse. The sky darkens early. Trees bend and snap. At one point, you're sure you see something moving alongside the path. Only it's too fast, too tall, and definitely not wearing shoes. You don't stop to check. Back at the village, people are inside. Doors barred. A smell of garlic in the air. Actual garlic nailed to window frames. The wind picks up again. This time, it brings a sound like whispering and a chill that settles under your skin, behind your ribs. You don't eat. You don't sleep. You just lie there, counting the seconds between gusts, wondering whether the wind has picked your name this time. The wind doesn't let up. Not for a moment. It howls like something ancient and irritated, and by the time dawn bleeds into your window, your nerves are shredded. You've heard whispers in the dark, half-dreamt, maybe, and something brushing against the shutters. But nothing solid, nothing you can point to. The feldsher knocks again, bright-eyed, clutching a weather-beaten anatomy scroll like it's a love letter. Today, he says, we study the lungs. You try not to groan. After what you've seen, lungs feel less like organs and more like haunted bellows waiting to collapse. Still, curiosity is stronger than exhaustion. So you pull on your boots and follow him to the Chapelturn laboratory. On the table lies a goat carcass, partly dissected, ribs spread like a concertina. Not exactly medical school chic, but it'll do. The feldsher rolls out his scroll. On it, a beautifully rendered diagram of human lungs, with arrows showing the flow of breath and the so-called vital winds, moving through the body like divine breezes. Back then, doctors believed your lungs were more than flesh. They were instruments. Bellows, to be precise. They pulled in the animal spirits of air, which traveled to your heart, infused your blood, and stoked the engine of life. A blockage? That wasn't just a cold. It was spiritual suffocation. And if the air you breathed was already corrupted, say, from a foul gust over a graveyard, well, then your entire system might turn inward, decay beginning from within. Vampirism, some claimed, wasn't a curse. It was a slow, breezy poisoning. You lean in closer. The scroll notes how breath traveled into subtle channels, a blend of real anatomy and mysticism. One of them, the Pneuma Vitalis, was thought to ferry not just air but soul essence. Lose your pneuma, and you might die. Or worse, stay alive without spirit. Sound familiar? It gets weirder. In one of the treatises, a diagram compares the lungs to wind instruments. The body is a pipe, the caption reads, and foul wind plays dreadful tunes. You can't tell if that's poetic or a passive-aggressive insult to your ancestors. Quirky fact of the day. Some doctors believe that people could absorb wind through their pores. That's right. Air didn't just go in through your mouth or nose. Any exposed skin was a possible entry point. That's why fevers were blamed on walking in wind without gloves or sleeping with your face turned toward an open window. According to the feldsher, one noblewoman refused to bathe outdoors for 10 years after a physician told her that breezes could steal her blood. Bathing indoors didn't help. She still died. You glance at the goat again. Its lungs are shriveled now, and the wind outside rattles the chapel doors like it wants in. The feldsher seems unconcerned. He's reading aloud from a medical text, something about corporeal wind mixing with grave stench. You tune out the details. Your attention is drawn instead to a note scribbled in the margin. Wind from east brings fever. Wind from grave brings hunger. That's not in the official text. Someone, maybe this very Feldscher, added it as a personal observation or warning. Historians still argue whether these beliefs were widely accepted medical truth or fringe theories slipped in under the radar of Enlightenment reason. But there's no denying they were acted on. Doctors diagnosed internal wind rot. Others recommended opening a vein to let out the haunted air. One text from Prague even details how to whistle out bad vapors by performing high-pitched vocalizations at sunrise. Folk medicine meets falsetto. The Feldscher now pulls out something odd, a dried pig's bladder inflated like a balloon. He squeezes it rhythmically to simulate breathing. The body inhales, exhales, he says. But if the wind already carries death, what then? You don't answer. You're too busy watching the wind press against the chapel's stained glass windows, dimming the sunlight like a hand smearing the sky. He tells you of a case, a boy of 10, coughing blood after a storm. The wind had shifted that night, rising from the east. By morning, the child was feverish, lungs filled with fluid, pupils dilated like saucers. They tried garlic, leeches, even a strange humming ritual. Nothing worked. When he died, they found blood on his lips and a startled look frozen on his face. They buried him deep. But 3 days later, a neighbor swore she saw him standing by her window. No footsteps, she said, just wind. The Feldscher places a small bell near the goat's head. Sometimes we use these, he explains, to catch a soul before it slips into the breeze. He says it casually, like that's a normal thing to do on a Tuesday. That night, you lie awake again. You press your face into the straw mattress, try to ignore the whispery, scraping outside. But now you understand the fear better. If the lungs can breathe in death, and the wind can stir a soul, what exactly are you inhaling with each breath? You think of the goat lungs, the bell, the pig bladder, of villagers waking up with blood on their collars, of the wind not as an element, but as a carrier, a courier, a thief. Sleep, when it finally comes, is shallow. You dream of breath that never leaves your chest, of lungs that swell until they sing. By now, you've realized something strange. In this village, even rumors ride the wind. They travel faster than horses, twist more than river paths, and land heavier than snow. Which is exactly what happens when you walk into the tavern the next morning and every head turns. You sit, and the barkeep, same one who nailed garlic to his shutters, slides you a cup of something warm. You're with the Feldscher, yes? He says, more statement than question. You nod cautiously. Then you should hear what the shepherd saw last night. Of course. Everyone leans in. A hunched old man in the corner, nursing a bowl of broth, clears his throat. It came from the woods, he says. Wind first, then a shadow. No steps, no sound, just breath. He draws out that last word like it's covered in frost. What follows is a slurry of tavern tales, all suspiciously convenient in their timing. Villagers seeing figures at windows, hearing voices in the wind, waking up with noses bleeding or strange bruises on their necks. No one claims to have been bitten, but the implications hang in the air like the sour scent of boiled cabbage. And the stories twist even further when the locals start quoting doctors. Yes, doctors. Those Enlightenment-era medics whose notes and charts somehow filtered into village gossip. You see, wind theory didn't stay confined to Latin manuscripts. Once it entered folklore, it became folklaw, solid, shareable, rewritten nightly over mugs of mead. You sip yours. It burns going down. The barkeep explains how Dr. Skorzewski, yes, the actual published physician, once claimed that certain eastward winds pulled sickness out of graveyards like a bellows. So it's why autumn's the season of the dead, he says. The soil loosens. The air hungers. Then he points to the hearth and adds, same as fire. Give it wind. It wakes. You'd argue, but what's the point? In this room, every breeze creaking through the window panes is basically an accessory to undeath. Here's where things get slippery. The more the villagers drink, the more they blend hard science with fever dreams. One man recalls a pamphlet that claimed vampires could become incorporeal, vapory things and travel by storm. Said they slip into your lungs while you sleep. Ride your breath. He's not entirely wrong. There is a fringe theory like that, penned by a Polish physician named Zaborowski in the 1760s. He called it transfusio aeris inferni, the transfusion of infernal air. Sounds like a death metal album. Was meant as metaphor. Villagers took it literally. Quirky tidbit. There was once a traveling preacher who sold vampire-proof cloaks, soaked in camphor oil and stitched with charms against bad wind. He died poor, probably because they smelled like pickled onions. You start noticing how these stories bend according to who's telling them. Farmers say the wind brings sickness. Blacksmiths claim it animates the dead. Midwives whisper that it carries whispers from unborn souls, deciding whether to come into the world or return to the dirt. Historians still argue whether folklore informed medicine or medicine merely codified what people already believed. But here, it's impossible to untangle. The people cite both scripture and science without blinking. As above, so below, someone says. As the wind moves, so does the soul. The felcher arrives late, clutching a satchel of herbs and a look that says someone else is sick. You follow him outside. The wind has changed direction again. It's coming from the northeast now, sharp and irregular. Bad angle, he mutters. It hits the churchyard first, then the village. You walk together down the main road, passing windows smeared with ash, doorways scattered with salt, and, strangest of all, small wooden spoons nailed above lintels. To confuse hungry spirits, the feldsher explains. They see many mouths and get distracted. Practical, if creepy. The patient is a young woman, flushed and feverish, muttering in her sleep. Her husband says she woke with dirt under her fingernails and a strange smell in her hair. Like mold or mildew, he says. And no, she hadn't left the house. You watch as the feldsher checks her lungs, feels her pulse, waves his herbs around like a man swatting flies that only he can see. He then opens the window, briefly, and tests the breeze with his cheek. Frowns, closes it again. Grave wind, he says under his breath. Too much pressure. She's breathing in their leftover breath. You want to argue. You do, but she's growing paler by the minute. Later that night, back at the tavern, you write notes in the margin of your borrowed treatise. Medicine is a straight road, but here, the road curves with the wind. Outside, the breeze moans like something caught in the trees. You wonder how many of tonight's stories will be retold tomorrow. Warped, frayed, reshaped, until even the truth must wear a cloak to walk among them. You don't so much wake up the next morning as crawl out of a restless haze. The wind kept up all night, less howling now, more like constant breathing. In, out, like the village itself is on life support. Or maybe something else is breathing with it. The feldsher looks worse for wear, too. He meets you at the chapel with bloodshot eyes and a cup of something pungent. Too many dreams, he mutters. Too much wind. Then, as casually as you'd ask someone to pass the salt, we dig tonight. Excuse me? Yes. You're doing another exhumation. The young woman from yesterday? She died before sunrise. The fever escalated. The breath stopped. And now her husband swears he saw her lips moving after she passed. A small motion, like someone murmuring secrets to the air. You head to the graveyard again, this time with more villagers, more tools, and more unease. Everyone's bundled up tight, not against cold, but against contact. There's a theory that exhumations stir up not just grief, but something airborne. Don't inhale too deeply, one man warns. That's how it gets you. The coffin is light when lifted too light. The wood creaks as it's opened. And sure enough, there she is. And she looks alive, not breathing. But the cheeks are rosy, the lips dark, as if she'd just whispered a spell before you arrive. Everyone leans in. The feldsher begins his inspection, candle in one hand, notes in the other. He mumbles about unresolved lung pressure, about post-mortem swelling. His tone is clinical, but you can hear the edge in it. This one unsettles him. He draws a small knife. The autopsy begins. Now, let's keep this PG, no gory details. But here's what you witness. Blood where there shouldn't be blood. Movement where there shouldn't be movement. A soft sigh, escaping from her throat like the last note of song. Everyone hears it. The wind rustles the trees above. The villagers don't wait. They demand a steak. The Feldshire tries to reason with them. There are gases, he explains. There is pressure in the lungs. If a breeze moves across her mouth, it can push air out. That's not life. That's decay. But decay doesn't explain the open eyes, the twitch of the fingers. Historians still argue whether these phenomena were exaggerated or whether some corpses really did appear to breathe after death. Some say it's the buildup of gases. Others point to a rarer theory, that environmental pressure changes, particularly during certain winds, can stimulate a corpse, making it shift, sigh, or even sit up. Not that any of that matters to the villagers. They perform the ritual again. Steak, incense, a whispered prayer half from scripture, half from memory. Then they rebury her, adding garlic and salt around the edges of the grave. Afterward, you return to the chapel, shaken. The Feldshire pours you a stiff drink and opens a different kind of text, an account from a physician named Dr. Kraft, written in the 1730s. It details what he calls a post-mortem wind stirring, where sudden changes in air pressure over shallow graves cause temporary movement in recently dead bodies. He called it spiritus fugitivus, the fleeing breath. There's also a reference to a case in Moldavia where several exhumed villagers were found rosy and swollen and thought to be vampires. The doctor suggested that sudden barometric changes, combined with a certain east wind, had halted or slowed decomposition. But again, how do you prove that to someone holding a pitchfork? Quirky detail. Some physicians insisted on placing mirrors or feathers under a corpse's nose for several days after death to ensure the breath was truly gone. One even designed a safety bell, a string from the hand to a bell above the grave, just in case the wind didn't lie. The Feldshire shares one final story before bed. Years ago, an entire village further north exhumed every grave after a particularly windy autumn. 30 bodies, each one said to have signs. All were burned. The doctor who recorded it noted no signs of plague, but a distinct shift in wind direction was recorded just before the hysteria began. Coincidence? He doesn't think so. You try to sleep, but that sigh, the one you heard from the corpse, won't leave your ears. It loops, slow and rhythmic, like a breath that shouldn't be there. And outside, the wind sighs too. You don't speak much the next day. No one does. The village is quieter now, not because the wind has stopped, but because people have stopped talking over it. You've seen what they saw. A woman buried and still full of breath. It doesn't matter that you know the science, or at least the best guesses of pre-micro medicine. In that moment, watching her lips part like she was about to say your name, logic blew away like chaff in the wind. But this morning brings something different. Politics. A rider from the city arrives, bearing a letter sealed with wax and self-importance. He's dressed too finely for these roads and frowns, as if the wind off the Carpathians might wrinkle his boots. He's from the regional court, a sort of health commissioner, though he's clearly never dirted his gloves with anything more than ink. The Feldshire meets him outside the chapel. You tag along, because curiosity is stronger than caution. Turns out, the region has had an incident. Several villages have reported sudden deaths, followed by rumors of vampire sightings. The higher-ups in the city are not amused. And now they're cracking down, not just on the undead, but on talk of the undead. The wind may be stirring sickness, but words? They're stirring revolt. The commissioner opens a leather satchel and pulls out pamphlets. Cheaply printed, poorly illustrated, but very much in demand. You flip through one. It shows a crude drawing of a bloated corpse with sharp teeth and captions like "Beware the East Wind." IT carries their hunger. Below that, advice on how to stake a loved one, just in case. These, the man says, grimacing, are undermining public order. He goes on to explain that tax collectors were attacked in 2 villages last week after being accused of spreading grave winds. People thought the officials were cursed, agents of disease, and had brought the weather with them. You blink. Wait, so now tax collectors are being mistaken for vampires. In the dark, it's all the same, the man mutters. Historians still argue whether vampire panics were primarily about disease or deeper social unrest. Here it's both. When crops fail and taxes rise, when people die in droves and the weather seems to mock you, you look for someone to blame. And if the elite ride in during a windstorm wearing black cloaks, well, fangs aren't much of a leap. The felcher flips through the pamphlet again and chuckles dryly. They got the anatomy wrong, he says, pointing at the stomach. Too high. Wind wouldn't swell that way. That's the part that gets you. He's not dismissing the vampire idea, just correcting its geometry. The commissioner announces that any village caught spreading wind-borne hysteria will face punishment. Books will be confiscated. Graves will be sealed. All vampire talk is to be reported, not repeated. You watch as the man leaves, boots polished and conscience untroubled. Back at the tavern, the locals are already whispering, not just about the commissioner, but about the timing. One man mutters that ever since the pamphlets started circulating, the wind's gotten worse. As if the stories call them, he says. Quirky rumor. One version of vampire lore suggests that the undead don't hunt unless they're remembered. They need attention like breath, wake only when summoned. So if pamphlets are flying across the countryside, naming them, describing them, fearing them aloud, are you not handing the wind a map? The felcher sits with you later by the fire, poring over his own collection of contraband literature. These stories, he says, they're half fear, half therapy. People need patterns. If they see a body sit up and the wind scream at the same moment, they want meaning. Even if the meaning is a corpse that walks. And now, the city wants to erase that meaning. Flatten the stories. Pretend the wind is just air and death is just final. But what if they're wrong? He pulls out a sealed envelope, sent from a colleague in the capital. Inside is a field report, 2 pages long, about a small village where every elder died within days of each other during an unusually strong boro wind. No disease detected. No obvious trauma. Just gone. A note scribbled in the margin reads, "The wind here howls names." You don't sleep that night. Not because of wind, but because of silence. It stopped. No breath. No creak. No sigh. And that, somehow, feels worse. The silence doesn't last. At first light, the wind returns. Not a scream this time, but a whisper. A low, looping murmur, like someone repeating a bedtime story in a language no one alive remembers. You wake already dressed, because you never really slept. Neither did the felcher. He's pacing outside the inn with a paper in his hand, and a look that says the world's unraveling faster than he can stitch it back. The pamphlets are multiplying. Apparently, the commissioner underestimated the reach of cheap ink and juicy terror. What started as a few crude pages in the back pockets of shepherds and market-goers has become a frenzy. Whole bundles of new pamphlets have appeared overnight, written by amateur apothecaries, failed seminarians, and one particularly dramatic tailor from Lowell. They're being copied by hand and passed out under doorways. You even find one tucked into your boot. The latest issue? The Wind That Hungers. Signs, symptoms, and stake placement. It includes a woodcut of a man sneezing with the caption, "First comes the breath, then the bite." And it's not just the illiterate who are buying in. Even clergy have started weighing in, sermonizing about the unclean winds from the east, declaring that faith alone cannot protect against a breath blown from beyond the veil. That evening, the felcher takes you to meet a printer, one of the few men in the region with a working press and fewer scruples. His shop is tucked between 2 butcher stalls and smells faintly of blood and ink. Inside, stacks of pamphlets wobble like unstable tombstones. He grins when he sees the felcher. "Back for more copies?" "I told you not to print that last one," the felcher mutters. "You said probably not," which is not the same. You leaf through a fresh stack. Headlines like, "The Wind Knows the Dead by Name," or "Don't Breathe After Sundown, Unless You Want to Share Your Lungs." You'd laugh if they weren't flying off the shelves like garlic in a panic. Quirky fact. One particularly bold pamphlet claims vampires can only rise when the wind shifts during sleep. Something about breath syncing with grave rhythms. The theory comes from an 18th century mystic who used to sleep standing up so his lungs wouldn't mirror the earth. He died from falling down a well. Still, these stories stick. And now, there's a whole economy forming around it. Traveling merchants sell pre-whittled steaks. Herbalists promise anti-vampire incense that smells suspiciously like burnt parsnip. Children skip rope to new rhymes. 1 for the whisper, 2 for the scream. 3 if the wind brings you back from your dream. Historians still argue whether pamphlet culture in the 18th century actually influenced vampire panics or simply rode their coattails. What's certain is that these printed fears were portable, storable, and repeatable. You couldn't take a witch with you, but a folded sheet of printed dread? That fits nicely in your pocket. The Feldsher buys one of each. Not to burn, but to analyze. Fear has a pattern, he says back at the chapel. And so does the wind. He pins a map to the wall. Every village that's reported vampire sightings in the last month. Each one gets a mark. Then, using the doctor's earlier notes, he overlays the dominant wind patterns. You feel your stomach drop. They match. Of course they match, he mutters. The wind carries spores. Bacteria. Fear. Memory. His hand trembles slightly. We were just trying to map one of them. He steps back, suddenly exhausted. But maybe all 3 ride together. Later that night, you sit alone by the fire, rereading one pamphlet in particular. It's called The Air Has Teeth. Dramatic. Cheaply bound. A little ridiculous. But there's a line inside that hits harder than expected. The wind never forgets who died with their mouths open. You can't explain why, but that settles inside your chest like a weight. The wind returns in force around midnight. It scratches the door, lifts the latch, and seems to wrap itself around the building like a blanket of whispers. You close your eyes and swear you hear breathing. Not yours. Not the Feldshers. Something older. Hungrier. You check the window locks for the 3rd time. They rattle anyway. And outside, somewhere deeper in the night, someone screams. Just once. Then the wind folds it away. You wake to the soft drip of rain and the faint scent of scorched paper. The Feldsher is already by the hearth, holding what remains of one of the pamphlets. Burned, charred at the edges, but still legible. He's staring at it like it told him something personal and unkind. You sit beside him quietly. You're starting to learn. There are days when the silence says the most. Breakfast is stale bread, if you can call chewing stone a meal. The wind has shifted again, now steady and cold. Less chaotic, more focused. It hums low along the gutters like it's tuning itself. Then you get an invitation. Well, not you specifically, but the Feldsher. He's been summoned to a neighboring estate, where a minor noble has grown tired of rumors infecting the lower classes. He's hosting a salon to reassert reason. A night of coffee, philosophy, and sharp-tongued derision. Naturally, you tag along. The estate is grand in that about-to-collapse in elegance sort of way. Mismatched furniture. Paintings of ancestors who look like they judged everything, including their own children. The salon is in a dusty parlor where half the guests are academics and the other half are pretending. Everyone's sipping something hot and bitter. Coffee, of course. A new luxury here, an enlightenment beverage meant to stimulate the mind. The wind outside rattles the shutters, but no one mentions it. That would be uncouth. One man, in a powdered wig and voice like a cackling drawer, announces that vampires are the last refuge of an unwashed mind. Another scoffs, blaming wind for illness? I suppose next we'll diagnose with birds. They laugh, not kindly. Then someone pulls out a pamphlet. You expect mockery, and sure enough, they begin reading aloud. The dead ride eastward when breath escapes its proper bed, with theatrical flair. But something odd happens. The room quiets. Not all at once. Just gently, like they're actually listening. Even the smug ones. And you realize they don't believe it, but they feel it. The field is shifting. Mockery is safer than admission. Safer than curiosity. Safer than fear. You glance at the fireplace. There's a stack of more pamphlets there. Someone's been reading them privately. Quirky detail. One guest, a gaunt man in a too-tight cravat, confesses to placing a bell over his chimney, only to detect foul breezes. You understand? He says with a wink that's not really a wink. Not for superstition. Another brags about owning a wind compass imported from England, which he uses to determine whether it's safe to take tea outdoors. Wind as fashion statement. The Feldsher stands to speak. There is no shame, he says in not knowing. A pause. But if the wind carries disease, and if bodies are found changed, and if the air shifts each time the grave is touched, then we're either chasing ghosts or ignoring clues. Historians still argue whether Enlightenment salons were sources of real inquiry or social preening. Here, maybe both. The line between curiosity and cruelty blurs easily when wine is involved. Later, one of the guests pulls you aside. A woman, sharp eyes, quiet voice. "There's a graveyard just west of here," she says. 6 bodies exhumed last winter. All sealed again. No one speaks of it. You ask why. Because the wind hasn't forgiven us. She says it like a joke, but leaves too quickly to laugh. You return to the village by dusk. The fields are empty. No shepherds. No children. The sky is that awful gray that isn't quite dark, but definitely not light. The kind of sky that can't decide what it wants. So it lets the wind do the talking. That night, the tavern is half full, but quieter. A new rumor floats in. A boy bitten on the hand by something that vanished. Another woman who coughs blood only when the wind turns. No one says the word vampire. They don't have to. The pamphlets are gone from the bar counter. But people still glance toward the window each time it creaks. You fall asleep with a candle burning and dream of a gathering of ghosts in powdered wigs, debating whether you count as living or not. You don't know what wakes you, only that when your eyes snap open, the candle's gone out and the wind outside sounds wrong. Not violent, not even loud, just too steady, like breath through a long hallway, like something waiting to be answered. By morning, the Feldschirr is packing for a trip. "We're going south," he says, "to the coast. Adriatic. Now, yes, there's a town where the wind never stops, and they've started nailing mouths shut. Well then, you travel by cart, the kind with wheels that sound like moaning floorboards and suspension designed by someone who hated backs. The journey takes 2 days. The terrain flattens, then climbs again. You pass through fields whipped by invisible hands, towns that smell of salt and rotting figs, and one village entirely abandoned, doors swinging, a table still set for dinner. No explanation, no note, just wind, your destination. A port town perched above the Adriatic, a place where the famous Bora wind whips through the mountains and down to the sea with the fury of a god that missed its morning coffee. You arrive to find shutters sealed, chimneys capped, and every single house marked with a chalked symbol on the door, a swirling spiral with 3 dots. What does it mean, you ask? The Feldschirr shrugs. It means they've seen things. You're taken to a small clinic near the docks, run by an aging physician who looks like he was born in a storm cloud. His voice is hoarse, his hands shake quick. "We don't treat the sick here," he says. "We treat the bitten." You pause. "Bitten?" He nods toward a patient behind a curtain. A boy, maybe 11, pale, sweating, a crescent-shaped wound on his shoulder. Not a bite exactly, but not one either. He woke screaming, the doctor says, said the wind, pushed open his window, and whispered his brother's name. Quirky fact, in this region, the Bora wind is so fierce that locals tie ropes between buildings to keep from being thrown into the sea. You see one man walking across the street, gripping a cord like it's a lifeline, because it is. But more unsettling than the wind's strength is its consistency. It never stops. It just changes mood. That night, it blows dry and warm. People bolt their doors, seal every crack. Not against burglars, against what they call airborne trespassers. The doctor shows you his records. He's mapped every illness against wind patterns for 10 years. Coughs rise when the Bora peaks. Fevers spike when it slows. But there's more. Graves that collapse after certain wind shifts. Dogs howling without cause. And yes, the appearances. He opens a file. Drawings. Descriptions. They never walk, he says. They drift. Their feet don't touch the ground. The wind carries them. They lean into the gust like sails. Historians still argue whether this town's obsession with the Bora's supernatural behavior was driven by actual sightings or just decades of storm-fueled cabin fever. But either way, the fear is real. And so are the nails. You're taken to a small chapel where 6 coffins rest, all freshly sealed. Each corpse has its mouth nailed shut. Not gruesomely, but with the same matter-of-factness you might reserve for a window latch. It's not to stop them from biting, the priest explains. It's to stop them from calling the wind. You think of how breath escapes the lungs, of how sound travels, of how, if one believes such things, a corpse might speak not in words, but in gusts. That night, the wind is louder. Your window trembles. You swear something taps once, then twice. You try to sleep. Then comes a knock. You freeze. Not on the door, on the glass. You rise, heart in your throat. Pull the curtain. Nothing. But the window is open. The feldsher rushes in seconds later. "The boy," he says. He's gone. You race to the clinic. The bed is empty, the window wide. The doctor's face is stone. No footprints outside. Just wind, spiraling in place, like it spun him away. They search until dawn. No sign, and no one asks why he left. They all assume the same thing. He didn't walk away. He was taken on the wind. You leave the Adriatic coast with the wind still gnawing at your coat, still humming in your ears. The boy was never found. They held a quiet funeral without a body, burying a bundle of herbs and river stones in his stead. Something for the soul to recognize, the priest said. You're not sure if he meant the boy's soul or whatever took him. The feldsher doesn't speak much on the journey back. His usual theories about pressure and breath are replaced with silence, eyes scanning the clouds like they might blink first. But when he finally does speak, he's got a plan, and it's built not from fire and stakes, but from brass and gears. You make a detour inland to a bustling town you've heard about in rumors, but never imagined quite like this. It's a place of tinkerers and inventors. Windmills, the hills like slow-turning watchmen. Brass pipes run along the roofs, chuffing steam. And at the center, a 2-story building with a weather vane bigger than your horse. Welcome to the Wind Lab. Inside, you meet a trio of gadgeteers, brothers, allegedly, who greet the feldsher with shouts and bear hugs. They wear goggles even indoors and smell faintly of solder and dry time. These men aren't healers. They're measurers, and they believe the problem isn't superstition. It's data, or the lack thereof. They show you a table full of devices, rudimentary anemometers, barometers, and a strange brass box filled with turning dials and a ribbon of paper tracking wind velocity. One even has glass tubes that hum slightly when exposed to breeze. They call it an aeolic scope. You try not to laugh. Then it hums louder. They're not mocking the vampire panic. Far from it. These men have been trying to quantify it. Wind speeds correlated with grave disturbances. Pressure shifts before unexplainable fevers. Air density near cemeteries where sightings occurred. Every vampire sighting, one says, has been preceded by a specific combination of wind patterns. Sudden drop in pressure. Shift from southeast to northeast. Spikes in dry particulate. He says it like he's reading a recipe. Historians still argue whether these early attempts to pin down the paranormal with weather science were legitimate inquiry or techno-theater. But here, there's no question. They believe their instruments are on the brink of catching something real. Something that breathes in sync with the earth. Quirky tidbit. One of the brothers has crafted what he calls the death weather compass. It's a pocket-sized vane you wear on your belt. If it points due east during a western wind, he insists you're in the presence of posthumous agitation. He says this like it's obvious. You're too tired to argue. The feldsher shares stories from the coast. The boy, the sealed mouths, the window left open. The gadgeteers listen without blinking, then race to modify their machines. They add tubes. They add fins. One attaches a dried bat's wing to a dial. For balance, he says. Maybe. That evening, they take you up a hill to a small cemetery where their newest device is already planted. It looks like an oversized bird cage stuffed with glass spirals and brass arms. They call it the breath harvester. You don't ask questions anymore. As the wind picks up, the device begins to tick. Then hiss. Then hum. You all freeze. One of the brothers leans in. It's matching a pattern. Same as last spring. 3 deaths. All unexplained. You check the chart. Graves 7, 9, and 11. You stare at the stones. 7 has lichen. 9 is cracked. 11 is missing its top. The feldsher grips your sleeve. Do you feel that? You do. A drop in the air. like the wind just held its breath. Then a long exhale. The anemometer spins wildly. The Yalek scope keens, and the breath harvester emits a tiny puff of cold steam. The brothers whoop with triumph. Confirmation, one yells. Of what? You demand. They exchange glances. Of something. That night, you lie awake in a gadgeteer guest room, surrounded by maps, wires, and a hanging skeleton meant for calibration. It sways in the breeze from a cracked window, and you realize they aren't trying to fight the wind-borne vampire theory. They're trying to prove it. One gadgeteer had said it best earlier, fiddling with a brass latch. People fear what they can't measure. But once you've measured it, it's yours. You fall asleep to the ticking of weather machines. And somewhere outside, the wind keeps count. You leave the wind lab at dawn, escorted by the quiet whirring of brass wings and the smell of warm solder. The gadgeteers are staying behind to refine their readings. One of them mutters something about tuning the breath harvester to catch quieter exhales. You don't ask what that means. You just nod, tighten your coat, and step back into the open air. The Feldscher is already packed. His face is drawn tight, like he's been chewing on questions all night and hasn't liked any of the answers. We go back, he says. It's time we talk about the new theory. You travel by slow cart again, this time with a wooden crate in the back containing a wind meter and 3 small vials of grave soil. For testing. For science. For reasons no one really wants to say aloud. By the time you reach the village, the trees are bowed, the river froths, and the sky smells like bruised metal. Everyone feels it. Something's changed. The wind isn't just breathing, it's waiting. Back in the chapel, the Feldscher lights a lantern, takes out a thick folder, and begins to read. The paper is crisp, the ink new. The title? A proposal for the transition from miasma to microbe, atmospheric vectors of disease. It's written by a university physician you recognize, one of the Enlightenment's rising stars. His theory? That illness doesn't ride the wind because of foul air or dead breath, but because of germs, invisible organisms, actual things. And suddenly, everything wobbles. This changes the entire vampire-wind connection. If breath can carry disease, and disease can ride particles, and particles can linger in certain air currents, then maybe the undead are just metaphors for infection. Maybe the wind isn't cursed, it's contaminated. It's a radical idea, one that has no garlic, no stakes, no howling corpses, but one that explains the fevers, the sudden deaths, the bloody mouths. And maybe, just maybe, it explains why digging up graves seem to make things worse. Disturbed soil, the Feldscher says, might release the very thing we fear. Not spirits, but spores. Historians still argue whether the wind as disease carrier theory was the final nail in the vampire folklore coffin, or whether it merely gave people new vocabulary for old fears. Either way, this new thinking shifts everything. And yet, the wind feels no different. You sit outside the chapel with the wind meter. It clicks lazily at first, then faster. The direction changes 3 times in 5 minutes. You don't need a graph to see the problem. Something's swirling. That night, a woman from the edge of the village comes running barefoot to the inn. She claims her dog barked all night, her shutters unlatched on their own, and her daughter, asleep in the next room, whispered a name she shouldn't know, the boy from the Adriatic. You try to ask how she could possibly know that. She breathed it, she says, in her sleep. That's the trouble with transitioning from superstition to science. It's not a clean break. People cling to what made sense, even if it never made sense rationally. Garlic and prayer may feel foolish, but they're tangible. Germs are invisible. You can't salt the air. You can't stake a microbe. Quirky fact. The first face masks designed for plague wind weren't to block scent. They were intended to filter soul particles. Some are filled with dried flowers. One, reportedly, contained powder bat bone. You light a candle at your bedside. You know it won't stop airborne particles or spirits, but something about the glow feels protective. Even the Feldscher has started sleeping with the wind meter beside him, as if numbers can guard dreams. You wake in the dark to that now familiar sound, breath where breath doesn't belong. Not panting, Not huffing, just a slow exhale. You sit up. The wind meter spins. You hold your own breath. In the silence, you hear it again. SSSH. Like someone telling you a secret. The feldsher rushes in with a lantern. Come, he says. Graves have collapsed. 3 of them. You go. The cemetery is glowing with firelight. Villagers huddle near fallen headstones. Soil has caved in. One grave's edge is licked by frost, though it hasn't snowed in weeks. You see the feldsher lean down and touch it. His hand comes back blue. The wind brushes your cheek like a breath that remembers your name. Maybe it's spores. Maybe it's spirits. Either way, you don't sleep again that night. And neither does the wind. You're not sure when the wind started whispering your name. Maybe it's in your head, lingering from that cold breath at the cemetery, or the graves that sank like lungs exhaling. Maybe it's because every time you close your eyes now, you feel something pressing in instead of just swirling around you. But whatever the cause, one thing is clear. It doesn't feel like just weather anymore. The feldsher doesn't say much today. He's packing up his records. Pamphlets, sketches, bits of graveyard moss, notes scrawled in margins about patterns of decay in wind-blown cases. His hands tremble as he folds a parchment. You notice he started wearing garlic under his scarf again, though he hasn't mentioned it. We should go, he says. Where? To the archives. You follow him back to the city, gray and coughing, where the cobblestones feel tired and even the bells seem to ring off-key. The university looms above the street like a thinking beast, hunched and brooding. It smells of ink and dust and pride. Inside, you descend into a lower chamber, part archive, part vault. Here, scholars store what they don't entirely trust. Manuscripts with teeth, theories that bit back. The feldsher requests one specific codex, a thick, iron-latched book titled De Aries Sepulchro, of air in the grave. The clerk raises an eyebrow, as if asking why would anyone want that, but doesn't argue. You leaf through it together. The pages groan. Inside are accounts stretching centuries. Plague deaths blamed on grave winds. Illnesses tied to wind shifts. Corpses too fresh, too noisy, too mobile. One page sketches a man halfway out of his coffin, mouth agape, breath spilling into a storm. The caption reads, "Wind unsealed the bone house." See this? The feldsher points to a marginal note. It is not the dead who walk, but the air that remembers them. Historians still argue whether this codex is a collection of fringe warnings or an early epidemiological guide, filtered through horror. What's harder to deny is its influence. You find echoes of it in later pamphlets, in physician journals, even in bedtime lullabies. And there, finally, is the last puzzle piece. A nursery rhyme, penned in elegant script. If the wind is warm, go play in the grass. If the wind is cool, let the evening pass. But if the wind moans and the shutters all shake, lie very still, for the dead are awake. You stare at it too long. You imagine children singing it. You imagine one of them breathing in the wrong gust and waking to someone else's memory. Quirky fact, in some corners of Eastern Europe, lullabies were altered seasonally. More soothing in summer, more cautious in autumn, when the winds were believed to carry more than just cold. A subtle way to prepare children for what grown-ups feared most but couldn't quite name. That night, you're last in the village, the wind goes quiet again. And that's worse. You check the wind meter. The needle twitches once, then stops. The feldsher burns his notes. Not all of them, just the ones with names. They shouldn't be recorded, he says. If they're remembered, they might answer. You leave the village before dawn. As your car pulls away, you look back once. The trees don't move. The river holds its breath. And behind the closed shutters, not a single candle flickers. Whatever was riding the wind, it's not gone. It's just waiting. Word count, 1,076. Wind down, 300 words. And now, the wind slows. The shutters settle. The firelight in your mind dims to a soft, flickering glow. You've wandered far tonight, through muddy cemeteries and creaking taverns, beside doctors who chase breath like it's a ghost, through villages where fear rides in on a breeze and never quite leaves. You've seen how the wind was blamed not just for sickness, but for the waking of the dead, and how sometimes the explanations made more sense than the facts. But you're safe now. No whistling gale under the door. No candles sputtering in sudden silence. Just your own quiet breath, steady and slow. Let yourself soften now. Sink a little deeper into the warmth of your blanket or the curve of your pillow. Let the weight of the story settle around your shoulders. Not heavy, but gentle, like the soft hush of a distant lullaby. The kind whispered just as the wind dies down. And if you hear something outside your window tonight, a creak, a rustle, a sigh, just remember, winds carry many things. Some of them are only leaves. Some are just dreams turning over in the air before they settle. You made it through. Close your eyes. Breathe in. Breathe out. Sleep, as they once said in lullabies, is the only wind we ride without fear. And now, the wind slows. The shutters settle. The firelight in your mind dims to a soft, flickering glow. You've wandered far tonight, through muddy cemeteries and creaking taverns, beside doctors who chased breath like it was a ghost, through villages where fear rode in on a breeze and never quite left. You've seen how the wind was blamed not just for illness, but for waking the dead. How sometimes the old explanations felt truer than the facts. But you're safe now. No whistling gale under the door. No candles sputtering in sudden silence. Just your own quiet breath, steady and slow. Let yourself soften now. Sink deeper into the warmth of your blanket or the hush of your room. Let the story's weight settle gently on your shoulders. Not heavy, just grounding. Like mist on grass. Like memory on the air. And if you hear something outside your window tonight, a creak, a rustle, a sigh, just remember, the wind carries many things. Most of them are only leaves. Some are just dreams, turning over in the air before they fade. So go ahead, close your eyes. Let your breath move in and out, light, effortless. The fear, the flickers, the fevered folklore, they're fading now. And sleep, as they once whispered in lullabies, is the only wind we ride without fear. You're here. You're still. You're safe. Good night.